My name is Sophia, and I am 28 years old. Last Halloween, my mother looked me straight in the eye during family dinner and said the words that would destroy everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and blood. "We wish you were never born, Sophia. You have been nothing but a burden since day one." The silence that followed was deafening. What happened next exposed a family conspiracy that had been brewing for decades, and my response would leave them all questioning everything they thought they knew about quiet, submissive little Sophia. Before we dive into this wild family revenge story, I want to know where you are watching from tonight. Drop your location in the comments below and smash that like button if you are ready to see how someone can go from family doormat to absolute savage in just 30 days. Hit subscribe because this story has more twists than a pretzel factory, and trust me, you will want to see how this Halloween horror story ends. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The autumn air was crisp that October evening when I arrived at my childhood home for what I thought would be our traditional Halloween family dinner. I had been looking forward to this gathering for weeks, having spent my entire paycheck on expensive wine and gourmet chocolates for everyone. As the youngest of 3 children, I had always been the people pleaser, the one who bent over backward to keep peace in our family. Walking up the familiar stone pathway, I noticed my older siblings, Marcus and Elena, had already arrived. Their luxury cars sat in the driveway like silent judges of my modest Honda Civic. I clutched the expensive gift bags tighter, hoping tonight would be different from our usual family gatherings, where I somehow always ended up feeling invisible or inadequate. The moment I stepped through the front door, something felt wrong. The atmosphere was charged with an electricity I could not identify. My mother, Patricia, barely acknowledged my arrival with a cold nod. My father, Robert, was unusually quiet, avoiding eye contact entirely. Marcus and Elena exchanged glances that seemed loaded with meaning I was not privy to understanding. During dinner, the conversation flowed around me like I was a ghost at my own family table. They discussed Elena's recent promotion to partner at her law firm, Marcus's latest real estate acquisition, and their upcoming vacation plans that mysteriously never included me. I tried to contribute to the conversation, sharing news about the nonprofit organization where I worked as a social worker, but my words seemed to evaporate into the air without acknowledgement. Then came the moment that would fracture everything I believed about family bonds. My mother set down her wine glass with deliberate precision and looked directly at me with eyes that held no warmth, no maternal love, nothing but cold calculation. "Sophia, we need to discuss something important with you tonight." My heart began racing as every family member turned their attention toward me. This felt orchestrated, planned, like they had been rehearsing for this moment. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably while my siblings leaned forward with expressions that ranged from anticipation to something that looked almost like satisfaction. "We have been talking as a family," my mother continued, her voice steady and merciless. "And we all agree that you have been nothing but a financial and emotional drain on this family for your entire life. We wish you were never born, Sophia. You have been nothing but a burden since day one." The words hit me like physical blows. My fork clattered against my plate as the room spun around me. I looked desperately from face to face, searching for someone to contradict this nightmare, someone to tell me this was some sick Halloween prank. Instead, I found nodding heads and expressions of relief as if a long-held secret had finally been released into the open air. Marcus leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with evident satisfaction. Finally, someone said it out loud. "Do you have any idea how much money our parents have wasted on your failed attempts at everything? College, graduate school, that ridiculous nonprofit job that pays you practically nothing?" Elena chimed in with lawyer-like precision. "We calculated it last week. Between educational expenses, bailouts from your financial mistakes, and the emotional energy spent managing your constant need for validation, you have cost this family over $200,000 and countless hours of stress." My mother nodded approvingly at her other children before continuing her calculated assault. "We think it would be best for everyone if you stopped coming to family gatherings. We are all successful. accomplished people, and frankly, your presence brings down the energy of every room you enter. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could have. These were the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, who had raised me, who had told me family was everything, yet here they sat united in their assessment that my very existence was a mistake they regretted. I felt tears threatening to spill, but something else was rising within me alongside the hurt. A strange clarity began emerging through the shock, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For the first time in 28 years, I was seeing my family without the rose-colored glasses of blind loyalty and desperate hope for acceptance. Looking around that table, I realized this was not a spontaneous moment of cruelty. This was planned, coordinated, and deliberate. They had discussed me in meetings I was not invited to, made decisions about my worth as a human being, and concluded I was disposable. The expensive gifts I had brought sat unopened on the counter suddenly, symbolic of my foolish attempts to buy love from people who viewed me as nothing more than an inconvenient obligation. But instead of collapsing into the sobbing apologetic mess they clearly expected, I did something that surprised everyone in that room, including myself. I started laughing. Not the hysterical laughter of someone having a breakdown, but the clear, genuine laughter of someone who had just received an unexpected gift of clarity. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Thank you for finally being honest about how you really feel." The confusion on their faces was immediate and obvious. This was not the script they had written for this evening. They expected tears, begging, promises to change, desperate attempts to win back their approval. Instead, they got acceptance, and something that looked dangerously close to relief. I stood up from the table, my movements deliberate and controlled. "I think this is the most honest conversation we have ever had as a family. And you know what? You are absolutely right. I have been wasting my time and energy trying to earn love from people who are incapable of giving it." Walking toward the door, I turned back for one final look at the family that had just disowned me. "I hope you enjoy your future family gatherings without the burden of my presence. Something tells me you are going to get exactly what you deserve." As I drove away from that house for what I knew would be the last time, my mind was already working, already planning. They thought they knew quiet, submissive Sophia, who would disappear gracefully when dismissed. They had no idea they had just awakened someone who had been sleeping for 28 years. Someone who understood exactly how to play the long game they had unknowingly started. The drive home that Halloween night felt like traveling through a portal between two different lives. Behind me lay 28 years of desperate attempts to earn love from people who viewed me as a burden. Ahead stretched the unknown territory of a life lived entirely for myself, free from the crushing weight of family expectations and conditional acceptance. I did not cry during that 40-minute drive home to my small apartment. Instead, my mind operated with a crystalline clarity I had never experienced before. Every family memory was reframing itself through this new lens of understanding. The forgotten birthdays, the Christmas gifts that were clearly last-minute afterthoughts, the way conversations stopped when I entered rooms, the subtle exclusions from family photos and important celebrations. It had never been about my worthiness or my failures. They had simply never wanted me in the first place, and tonight they had finally found the courage to say it out loud. Back in my apartment, I made myself a cup of tea and sat down at my kitchen table with a notebook. If my family wanted to play games, they were about to discover that quiet little Sophia had been paying attention for 28 years. I knew every one of their secrets, their weaknesses, their carefully constructed public personas, and the dark truths they worked so hard to hide from the world. Marcus, the golden boy real estate mogul, had built his fortune through questionable practices that bordered on fraud. I knew because he had drunkenly confessed his corner-cutting schemes to me during family gatherings, assuming I was too naive to understand the implications. He cheated on his wife regularly, maintained secret offshore accounts to hide assets during his divorce proceedings, and had been skimming money from his business partnership for years. Elena, the successful lawyer, had her own collection of professional and personal scandals. She had falsified evidence in at least 3 cases I knew about, used her position to intimidate witnesses, and maintained cocaine habit that would destroy her legal career if it became public knowledge. Her marriage to the city's district attorney was nothing more than a political alliance, and both of them maintained separate lives with different partners while presenting a united front for the cameras. My parents, the pillars of our community, had their own dark secrets. My mother's charity work was primarily a money laundering operation for my father's business dealings with some very questionable clients. They had been filing false tax returns for over a decade, claiming deductions for charitable donations that never actually occurred, and using their social connections to cover up my father's involvement in several environmental violations at his construction company. But the most interesting discovery came when I started digging into the family finances I had never been allowed to know about. Using my background in social work and my access to public records, I began piecing together a financial picture that revealed the true motivation behind tonight's intervention. Our grandfather had left a substantial inheritance to be divided equally among his 3 grandchildren when the youngest turned 30. That inheritance was worth over $2 million, and my 30th birthday was only 18 months away. Suddenly, their decision to cut me out of the family made perfect financial sense. They were not just rejecting me emotionally, they were positioning themselves to claim my portion of the inheritance by proving I was no longer a member of the family. This revelation transformed my hurt into something far more powerful and focused. They had not just attacked me, they had stolen from me, manipulated me, and tried to defraud me of my rightful inheritance. This was not just family drama anymore. This was criminal conspiracy. Over the next several days, I threw myself into research with the methodical precision of someone building a legal case. I contacted old friends from law school who now worked in various government agencies, reached out to investigative journalists I had met through my nonprofit work, and began documenting everything I knew about my family's illegal activities. The beauty of being the invisible family member was that people had said things in front of me for years, assuming I was too unimportant to matter. They had made phone calls, conducted meetings, and discussed their schemes while I sat quietly in corners, dismissed as part of the furniture. Now all of those overheard conversations and witnessed interactions became valuable evidence in my growing case against them. I also began reaching out to other people my family had wronged over the years. Marcus's business partner who had been systematically cheated, Elena's former clients who had been failed by her deliberately poor representation, employees of my father's company who had been fired for refusing to participate in illegal activities, victims of my mother's charity fraud who had never received the help they had been promised. What I discovered was a network of people who had been hurt, cheated, and betrayed by my family members, but who had felt powerless to do anything about it. Individually, they were isolated victims. Together, they represented a formidable coalition with the power to bring down the entire family structure. But I was not interested in simple revenge or destruction for its own sake. I wanted justice, accountability, and most importantly, I wanted them to experience the same powerlessness and rejection they had made me feel for my entire life. My plan began taking shape over those cold November days following Halloween. It was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. I would not attack them directly or obviously. Instead, I would create a situation where their own actions and choices would destroy them, where their greed and arrogance would become the instruments of their downfall. The first phase involved establishing my independence and credibility. I documented all of my own finances, secured legal representation, and began building relationships with law enforcement officials who could act on the information I was gathering. I also started a private blog where I documented my family's treatment of me, creating a timeline that would establish motive for my actions while positioning myself as a victim rather than an aggressor. Phase 2 involved carefully leaking selected information to the right people at the right times. Anonymous tip here, a strategic conversation there, evidence appearing in the right hands when it would do the most damage. I would not be the one destroying my family. I would simply be the catalyst, that allowed their own corruption to consume them. But the most important element of my plan was patience. They expected me to disappear quietly, to fade away like a properly shamed family embarrassment. Instead, I would remain visible, successful, and resilient while their world crumbled around them. When the dust settled, I wanted them to know exactly who had orchestrated their downfall and why they had brought it upon themselves. As December approached, I was no longer the broken, rejected daughter who had fled their Halloween dinner in shock. I had become something far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain from seeing justice served. December arrived with the kind of bitter cold that seeps into your bones and stays there, much like the determination that had taken root in my heart. I had spent the month following Halloween, transforming myself from a wounded victim into a strategic architect of justice. My small apartment had become a war room, with documents spread across every surface, timelines pinned to walls, and a growing network of allies who shared my desire to see my family held accountable for their actions. The beauty of working in social services was the connections it provided to people in every level of government and law enforcement. Over the years, I had built relationships with investigators, prosecutors, journalists, and activists who understood the importance of exposing corruption wherever it existed. Now, those professional relationships were becoming personal alliances in my quest for justice. Detective Maria Santos had been one of my closest collaborators on several cases involving family fraud and abuse. When I approached her with information about my own family's activities, her interest was immediately piqued. She had been investigating financial irregularities in several charity organizations, and my mother's foundation had already appeared on her radar as potentially problematic. "Sophia, what you are describing is not just family drama," Maria told me during our first official meeting about the case. "This is organized criminal activity that has been going on for years. If you can provide the documentation you are claiming to have, we could be looking at multiple felony charges for all of them." I had come prepared with copies of everything I had gathered so far. Bank records that showed money flowing between my father's construction company and my mother's charity in ways that violated numerous laws. Email communications between Elena and her colleagues that demonstrated her willingness to manipulate evidence and intimidate witnesses. Financial documents that revealed Marcus's fraudulent business practices and hidden assets. But the most damaging evidence was the recording I had made of that Halloween dinner conversation. Living in a single-party consent state meant I could legally record conversations I was part of without informing the other participants. The entire dinner had been captured on my phone, including their detailed discussion of my financial drain on the family and their plans to exclude me from family inheritance. More importantly, the recording also captured their casual discussion of various illegal activities, spoken with the carelessness of people who believed they were in a completely safe environment. "They incriminated themselves," Maria said, shaking her head in amazement as she listened to portions of the recording. "This is prosecutorial gold. They literally confessed to multiple crimes while explaining why they were cutting you out of the family." While Maria began the process of opening official investigations, I was working on the second phase of my plan. I had identified the key pressure points that would cause maximum damage to each family member's carefully constructed life. For Marcus, the vulnerability was his marriage and business partnerships. His wife, Catherine, was a successful surgeon who had no idea about his infidelities or financial crimes. She was also the daughter of one of the city's most prominent families, people who valued reputation above almost everything else. If Catherine learned the truth about her husband, the resulting divorce would not only destroy him emotionally, but would also give her legal grounds to claim a substantial portion of his hidden assets. I arranged for Catherine to accidentally discover evidence of Marcus's affairs and financial irregularities. A series of anonymous emails containing bank records and photographs began appearing in her personal account, each one more damaging than the last. I also ensured that her father, a retired judge with significant influence in legal circles, became aware of Marcus's questionable business practices through his professional network. Elena's weakness was her professional reputation and her relationship with the district attorney. Both depended entirely on her ability to maintain an image of ethical behavior and legal competence. I began feeding information about her misconduct to the State Bar Association through carefully coordinated anonymous complaints. Each complaint was accompanied by documentation that proved her violations of legal ethics and professional standards. Simultaneously, I provided evidence of her drug use to investigative journalists who specialized in exposing corruption among public officials. The fact that she was married to the district attorney made her story particularly newsworthy, especially when combined with evidence of her professional misconduct. My parents required a more complex approach because their crimes were intertwined with their social standing and business relationships. I worked with Maria to coordinate raids on both my father's construction company and my mother's charity organization. The timing was carefully orchestrated to cause maximum public embarrassment while also preserving evidence before they could destroy it. But I also had a more personal weapon to use against them. Through my research into family financial records, I had discovered something that would devastate my mother's carefully constructed image as a pillar of the community. She had been embezzling money from her own charity for years, using the funds to pay for luxury vacations, expensive jewelry, and other personal expenses that she could never have afforded on my father's legitimate income. More damaging still, some of that stolen money had been intended for families in crisis, people who were depending on charitable assistance during their darkest moments. I arranged for several of those families to learn exactly why their promised assistance had never materialized. These were people who had lost homes, who had been unable to afford medical treatments for their children, who had trusted my mother's organization during their most vulnerable moments, only to be betrayed and abandoned. As January approached, all of the pieces of my plan were falling into place with a precision that would have made my family proud if they had been capable of recognizing strategic thinking when they saw it. The investigations were progressing, the evidence was mounting, and the pressure was building from multiple directions simultaneously. But the most satisfying element of my revenge was watching them begin to realize that something was wrong without understanding the source of their problems. Marcus started receiving angry calls from business partners, demanding explanations for financial irregularities they were suddenly noticing. Elena found herself facing professional reviews and ethical investigations that seemed to come from nowhere. My parents watched their social circle slowly distance itself as rumors began circulating about their business practices and charitable activities. They were experiencing the same confusion and powerlessness they had made me feel for 28 years. The difference was that their suffering was the direct result of their own criminal actions and moral failures, while mine had been the result of nothing more than existing in their world. The holiday season passed without any contact from my family, which suited my purposes perfectly. They were too busy dealing with their growing list of legal and personal problems to worry about the daughter they had discarded. Meanwhile, I was building a new life surrounded by people who actually valued my presence and contributions. Through my work exposing my family's crimes, I had connected with other people who had survived family rejection and abuse. We formed an informal support network that provided the kind of unconditional acceptance and genuine care that I had never experienced with my blood relatives. These chosen family members celebrated my successes, supported me through difficult moments, and reminded me daily that my worth as a human being had never been dependent on my biological family's approval. But as January moved toward February, I knew the time was approaching when my family would finally understand exactly who had been orchestrating their downfall and why their Halloween rejection had been the biggest mistake of their lives. The final phase of my plan was about to begin, and it would leave no doubt about the consequences of underestimating quiet, submissive little Sophia. The stage was set, the evidence was documented, and justice was finally ready to be served with the precision and thoroughness that my family had always claimed to value in their business dealings. They were about to learn that some lessons can only be taught through experience, and some consequences cannot be avoided through money, influence, or social connections. February arrived like the final act of a perfectly orchestrated symphony, with every instrument ready to play its part in the crescendo I had been building for months. The investigations Detective Maria Santos had initiated were reaching critical mass, and the evidence I had methodically gathered was about to destroy my family's carefully constructed empire of lies and criminal activity. The first domino fell on a cold Tuesday morning when federal agents raided my father's construction company. I watched from across the street as they carried out boxes of financial records, computers, and documents that would prove his years of environmental violations, tax evasion, and fraudulent government contracts. The local news crews arrived within hours, broadcasting footage of my father being led away in handcuffs while his employees stood in shocked silence. That same afternoon, my mother's charity organization faced its own reckoning. State investigators seized all financial records while representatives from the Attorney General's office questioned staff members about missing funds and phantom donations. The families who had been denied assistance because of my mother's embezzlement stood outside the building, sharing their stories with reporters who were eager to document the human cost of her greed. But the most devastating blow came when Elena's professional world imploded in spectacular fashion. The State Bar Association announced a formal investigation into her conduct, while simultaneously a major newspaper published a detailed exposé about corruption in the district attorney's office that centered on Elena's drug use and evidence tampering. Her husband, desperate to save his own career, immediately filed for divorce and publicly distanced himself from her actions. Marcus's carefully constructed business empire crumbled when his wife Catherine filed for divorce, and her father's legal connections ensured that every aspect of his financial dealings faced intense scrutiny. His business partners, learning about his years of embezzlement and hidden assets, filed criminal complaints that added to his growing legal troubles. The luxury lifestyle he had built through fraud and deception vanished overnight as assets were frozen and accounts were seized. Within a week, my entire family had gone from respected members of the community to the subjects of criminal investigations, newspaper headlines, and social media speculation. Their phones rang constantly, with calls from reporters, angry victims, and former associates trying to distance themselves from the scandal. That was when my mother made the phone call I had been anticipating for months. "Sophia, we need to talk." Her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it, stripped of the arrogance and authority she had wielded so confidently during that Halloween dinner. "Something terrible is happening to our family, and we need to come together to face this crisis." I let the silence stretch for several heartbeats before responding, my voice calm and controlled. "I am sorry, but I think there has been some mistake. You made it very clear at Halloween that I am not part of your family. You wished I had never been born, remember? That was just... We were upset about other things. We did not mean it the way it sounded," she stammered, desperation creeping into her tone. "You are our daughter and we love you. We need your help right now." "My help?" I laughed, the sound devoid of warmth or sympathy. "What exactly do you think I can do to help people who are facing the consequences of their own criminal actions?" The pause that followed told me she was beginning to understand that this conversation was not going according to her expectations. "Sophia, do you know something about what is happening to us?" "I know that justice has a way of catching up with people who think they are above the law," I replied. "I know that families who treat their children like burdens sometimes discover that those children were the only things standing between them and complete destruction." When she finally asked the question I had been waiting for, her voice was barely a whisper. "Did you do this to us?" "I did not make any of you commit crimes," I answered truthfully. "I did not force any of you to lie, cheat, steal, or abuse your positions of trust. All I did was ensure that the right people learned about the choices you had been making for years." The silence that followed was profound, filled with the weight of realization and the sound of a worldview crashing down. When she spoke again, her voice carried a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You destroyed your own family over hurt feelings from one dinner conversation." "No," I corrected her firmly. "You destroyed your family the moment you decided that love was conditional and that I was expendable. You destroyed it when you chose crime over integrity, greed over honesty, and cruelty over compassion. I simply made sure that your choices had consequences. Over the next few days, each of my family members attempted to contact me with increasingly desperate appeals for mercy, assistance, or simply understanding. Marcus offered me money to recant my statements to investigators. Elena tried to convince me that her career destruction would somehow hurt me too. My father made vague threats about family loyalty and the consequences of betrayal, but their words no longer had any power over me. I had spent 28 years desperate for their approval, willing to sacrifice my own happiness and self-respect for even the smallest crumb of acceptance. Now, hearing their panic and desperation, I felt nothing but the cold satisfaction of justice being served. The most revealing conversation came when all four of them showed up at my apartment building together, a pathetic attempt at presenting a united family front. I watched from my window as they argued among themselves in the parking lot, each one blaming the others for their current predicament, while simultaneously trying to coordinate their approach to convincing me to help them. When I finally agreed to speak with them, it was on my terms, and in a public location where their behavior would be witnessed and potentially recorded. We met at a coffee shop near my office, surrounded by other customers who would serve as unwitting witnesses to this final family confrontation. They looked terrible. The stress of their legal troubles had aged them visibly, and their usually polished appearances had given way to the disheveled desperation of people whose carefully controlled world was collapsing around them. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. "Sophia, please," my father began, his voice carrying none of its former authority. "We are willing to admit we made mistakes. We said things we should not have said, but this has gone too far. You are destroying innocent people along with us." "Innocent people?" I raised an eyebrow. "Like the families who could not afford medical treatment because my mother stole their charity money. Like the employees who lost their jobs because of Marcus's fraudulent business practices. Like the defendants who went to prison because Elena falsified evidence. They had no answer for that. Because there was no answer. Their crimes had real victims, real people whose lives had been damaged by their greed and corruption. My actions had simply ensured that those victims finally had a voice and that justice was finally being served. As I stood to leave that coffee shop for the last time, I looked at each of them individually, these people who had shaped my early life through rejection and conditional love. "You taught me that family is not about blood," I said quietly. "You taught me that some people are not capable of love, and that my worth is not determined by your approval. Thank you for those lessons. They have served me well." The weeks following our final confrontation brought a cascade of consequences that exceeded even my most optimistic expectations for justice. My family's downfall was not just swift. It was absolutely comprehensive, touching every aspect of their lives and leaving no part of their carefully constructed empire intact. Marcus was the first to face formal sentencing. His business partner's lawsuit had uncovered a web of fraud so extensive that federal prosecutors decided to make an example of him. The judge, clearly disgusted by the scope of his criminal activity and the impact on his victims, sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison. His wife Catherine had already moved back to her family estate with their children, and divorce proceedings had stripped him of most assets that were not already frozen by the government. During his sentencing hearing, I sat in the back of the courtroom and watched as victim after victim testified about how his fraudulent schemes had destroyed their businesses, their savings, and their trust in the system. Several elderly investors had lost their retirement funds to his Ponzi-style operations. Small business owners described how his failure to pay legitimate bills had forced them into bankruptcy. The human cost of his greed was staggering and undeniable. Elena's legal career ended with a dramatic disbarment hearing that made front-page news for weeks. The evidence of her evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and drug use was so overwhelming that she chose not to contest the charges. 3 of her former clients were granted new trials after investigators discovered the extent of her misconduct, and civil lawsuits from her victims promised to keep her in legal trouble for years to come. Her marriage to the district attorney had ended in spectacular fashion when he held a press conference announcing their divorce and his complete cooperation with all investigations into her conduct. The political calculation was obvious, but it left Elena completely isolated and unemployable in the legal field that had once been her identity and source of power. My parents faced the most complex legal challenges because their crimes were so intertwined with each other and with their business operations. My father's construction company was not just shut down, it was dismantled piece by piece as investigators uncovered decades of environmental violations, safety infractions, and fraudulent government contracts. The cleanup costs for his illegal dumping alone exceeded $2 million. Money that would come from the sale of every asset the family possessed. My mother's charity fraud trial became a media sensation when prosecutors revealed the full scope of her embezzlement and the stories of families she had betrayed. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in prison and ordered full restitution to her victims, a sum that effectively bankrupted whatever remained of the family's legitimate assets. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of their downfall was watching their social circle completely abandon them. These were people who had valued reputation and appearance above all else, and they found themselves completely ostracized by the community they had worked so hard to impress. Former friends crossed the street to avoid them. Social invitations stopped arriving. Business associates refused to take their calls. The beautiful family home where that fateful Halloween dinner had taken place was sold to pay legal fees and restitution orders. I drove by during the estate sale and watched strangers picking through the possessions that had once represented my family's success and social status. The expensive artwork, designer furniture, and luxury items that had been symbols of their superiority were now being sold for whatever price they could get. Meanwhile, my life had transformed in ways I could never have imagined during those dark days following their rejection. The experience of seeking justice for myself and my family's victims had inspired me to specialize in helping other people who had been betrayed by those they trusted most. I had started a new nonprofit organization focused on supporting victims of family financial abuse and helping them navigate the complex legal and emotional challenges of seeking justice. Detective Maria Santos had become not just a professional colleague, but a genuine friend who understood the courage it had taken to expose my own family's crimes. She often referred cases to my organization when she encountered families dealing with similar betrayals and abuse. Working together, we had helped dozens of people find the strength to stand up to family members who had been exploiting and manipulating them for years. The most meaningful relationships in my new life came from the support group I had started for people who had survived family rejection and abuse. These chosen family members had become the loving, supportive community I had always craved, but never found with my biological relatives. They celebrated my victories, supported me through difficult moments, and reminded me daily that love is not about blood relations, but about mutual respect, care, and genuine affection. 1 year after that Halloween dinner, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. Catherine Marcus's ex-wife had come to thank me personally for exposing her husband's crimes and saving her from a lifetime of unknowing participation in his fraud. I spent 10 years married to a stranger, she told me, tears streaming down her face. I thought I was building a life with someone I loved, but he was stealing from people, cheating on me, and using my family connections to legitimize his criminal activities. If you had not been brave enough to expose the truth, I might have spent the rest of my life as an unwitting accomplice to his crimes. She had brought me a letter from her father, the retired judge who had helped coordinate some of the legal actions against Marcus. In it, he thanked me for my courage and offered to support my nonprofit organization in any way possible. He also mentioned that he had been following my work with family abuse victims and was impressed by the positive impact I was making in the community. These moments of recognition and gratitude reminded me that my quest for justice had been about much more than personal revenge. By exposing my family's crimes, I had protected future victims, provided closure for past victims, and demonstrated that no one is above accountability, no matter how successful or well-connected they might appear to be. As winter turned to spring, I found myself reflecting on the woman I had been just 12 months earlier. That version of Sophia had been desperate for approval, willing to sacrifice her own dignity for even the smallest crumb of familial acceptance, and completely unaware of her own strength and capabilities. The woman I had become was confident, purposeful, and surrounded by people who valued her for who she truly was, rather than what she could provide for them. I had learned that sometimes the greatest gift family can give you is the clarity that comes from showing you exactly who they really are. 2 years have passed since that Halloween dinner changed the trajectory of my entire existence, and I am writing this from the office of the nonprofit organization I founded to help other survivors of family betrayal and financial abuse. The walls are covered with thank you letters from people who found the courage to seek justice after hearing their stories, and my desk holds invitations to speaking engagements where I share the lessons learned from my journey through family destruction and personal reconstruction. My biological family's fate was sealed through their own choices and actions. Marcus is serving his federal sentence in a minimum security prison where he spends his time working in the kitchen and attending mandatory financial responsibility classes. His children, now in Catherine's full custody, have thrived without his manipulative influence in their lives. Catherine remarried last year to a genuinely decent man who treats her with the respect and honesty she deserves. Elena never recovered from her professional disgrace. She works now as a paralegal in a small firm that handles personal injury cases, earning a fraction of her former salary, and living in a modest apartment far from her old social circles. Her ex-husband won his re-election as district attorney by positioning himself as a corruption fighter, partially based on his decisive action in exposing his own wife's criminal behavior. My parents were released from prison after serving reduced sentences for cooperation with ongoing investigations into other corrupt businesses and charity organizations. They live now in a small rental apartment, both working retail jobs to pay their restitution obligations. My father's construction license was permanently revoked, and my mother is banned from working with any nonprofit organization for the remainder of her life. The inheritance that had motivated their initial rejection of me was distributed according to our grandfather's original will. My portion, combined with the foundation I had built through my nonprofit work, allowed me to purchase a beautiful home where I host regular gatherings for my chosen family of fellow survivors and supporters. But the most profound transformation has been in my understanding of what family actually means. The people who gather around my dinner table now are not related to me by blood, but they are connected to me through bonds that are infinitely stronger than genetics. There is Detective Maria Santos, who has become like the protective older sister I never had. There is Catherine and her new husband, who represent the possibility of love based on honesty and mutual respect. There are the dozens of survivors I have worked with who have shown me that resilience and healing are always possible, even after the deepest betrayals. Last month, I received a letter from my mother. It was the first communication from any family member since our coffee shop confrontation 2 years ago. In it, she attempted to rebuild some kind of relationship, claiming that prison had given her time to reflect on her mistakes and that she finally understood the pain she had caused me throughout my life. I read her letter twice, then filed it away without responding. Not because I am incapable of forgiveness, but because I have learned that forgiveness does not require reconciliation, and that some relationships are too fundamentally toxic to be salvaged, regardless of apologies or claimed insights. The woman who used to desperately crave any acknowledgement from these people no longer exists. In her place stands someone who understands that love is not something you earn through perfect behavior or endless sacrifice. Real love is freely given, consistently demonstrated, and never used as a weapon to control or manipulate. My work with family abuse survivors has taught me that my experience, while painful, was far from unique. Countless people struggle with families who view them as burdens, disappointments, or sources of supply, rather than individuals worthy of love and respect. The difference is that most of those people never find the strength or opportunity to break free from the cycle of abuse and manipulation. Through my organization, we have helped over 300 families expose financial abuse, document emotional manipulation, and seek legal justice for crimes committed by trusted relatives. Each case reminds me that family betrayal is often the deepest cut, precisely because it comes from people who are supposed to provide unconditional love and support. But every success story also demonstrates that healing is possible, that chosen families can provide the love that biological families failed to give, and that justice, while sometimes delayed, often finds its way to those who persevere, with truth and courage. Standing in my garden this morning, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, I reflected on the strange gift my family gave me that Halloween night. Their rejection forced me to discover my own strength. Their betrayal taught me to value genuine relationships, and their criminal behavior provided the catalyst for a career dedicated to helping others find justice and healing. I have never been happier, more fulfilled, or more confident in my worth as a human being. The quiet, submissive daughter who once begged for scraps of approval has been replaced by a strong, purposeful woman who knows exactly what she brings to the world and refuses to accept anything less than genuine love and respect from the people in her life. Sometimes people ask me if I regret exposing my family, or if I ever wonder what might have happened if I had simply accepted their rejection and disappeared as they expected. The answer is always the same. I regret nothing about seeking justice for myself and their victims. I regret nothing about refusing to enable their criminal behavior through silence. I regret nothing about choosing truth over family loyalty when those two values came into direct conflict. The only thing I regret is that it took me 28 years to realize my own worth and to understand that some relationships are not worth preserving regardless of blood connections or social expectations. As I finish writing this story, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever experienced betrayal from people who were supposed to love you unconditionally? Have you found the courage to seek justice when family members crossed lines that should never be crossed? How do you define family in your own Krigsbader's life? And what boundaries do you maintain to protect your peace and dignity? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because your story matters, and your healing journey deserves recognition and support. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help other survivors find these messages of hope and empowerment. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the darkest moments and building beautiful lives from the ashes of family destruction. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they are not alone in their struggles with toxic family dynamics. Thank you for taking this journey with me and for believing that everyone deserves genuine love, respect, and justice in their lives. Remember that your chosen family, the people who celebrate your victories and support you through your struggles, are often more valuable than any biological connection that brings only pain and manipulation into your world. May you find the courage to protect your peace, the wisdom to recognize genuine love, and the strength to build the life you truly deserve.